Let's study how neurons process stimuli. The best way to understand how a neuron works is going through some drawings to explain how this happens. Let's look at a graph to see or describe what's going on here. So on this graph, on this side we have voltage, and on this end we have time. Now, we start off with the resting membrane potential at 70 minus 70 volts. And that is our resting membrane potential. As we increase, this gets less negative or more positive. That resting membrane potential, it actually changes with the stimuli, causing what is called depolarization. So this is our resting membrane potential, depolarization. With a specific stimuli coming through the cell, say for example we're dealing with sodium. A stimuli with sodium coming through the cell, it's going to go through this process of depolarization as sodium comes in through the cell, or sodium goes into this neuron here through sodium channels. As sodium comes into the cell through the channels, it's going to be the process of depolarization. Changing the charge to a more positive charge, right, as we go up this graph here. Let's say, for example, now as sodium comes into the cell, potassium ions start rushing out of the cell. So sodium would come in through its channels, potassium ions at the same would come outside of the cell. So K plus would come out of the cell in order to balance the electrochemical gradient inside and outside of the cell. Potassium ions would come outside and sodium would rush in. As potassium ions come outside, we're going to go through this repolarization process. So from depolarization when sodium came in, repolarization as potassium goes out of its channels. So that will continue until the membrane potential is reached, a value that is more negative. As you can see here, it's more negative as we go down this graph here. This is called hyperpolarization. The neurons then are less likely to fire an action potential. Now, after this happens, when sodium moves back out of the cell, sodium is going to come back out of the cell, but this time not through channels. Sodium is going to come back out of the cell through sodium-potassium pump. So Na plus pump, right? 3 sodium ions will come out of the cell, while 2 potassium ions will come into the cell in order to go back to this resting membrane potential until we reach resting membrane potential again. The process will continue throughout the neuron until it leaves that neuron, and it happens over again, eliciting changes in the cell, tissue, and muscles, for example, in order to elicit movement from your muscles and other activity from target cells. Now, remember, study in order for you to grow.